it wrong. I was like, but that's they. I'm sorry.
All right. Good evening, family. Thank you for joining us for Tailor Made Tuesday. I am Elder Latanya Cooper, the Executive Administrator for Bridge Builders International Church, and I will be your facilitator on this evening. I want to acknowledge our pastor, Dr. Jonathan L. Pack, and I want to thank him for allowing us the opportunity to serve in his stead on tonight. As usual, I ask that you continue to keep our pastor lifted in your prayers and for his strength during this season. So thank you, Dr. Pack, for allowing us to serve for you. During this season, we started out with the informative, fresh, entertaining Jonathan Pack show. And since then, we've gone on and we've discussed trust issues. And most recently, Minister Yolanda Harper led us in the discussion of asking for a friend. Tonight, Tailor Made Tuesdays are resuming. And again, we are asking everyone to invite someone to join us, share live, start a watch party, text and invite a friend to jump on the live tonight. And let's get ready to be blessed by this amazing panel on tonight. We want to encourage you to leave a comment, to hit the hearts, hit the likes as we go further into our discussion tonight, because it's going to be a good one. I believe some people are going to be helped on tonight. So on tonight, we have four amazing ladies that are joining us on tonight. We have Lady Sandy Keys and Lady Tanaya Keys. They are a mother and daughter duo. And Lady Sandy is a proud member of BBIC and an even prouder mother of three beautiful daughters. And Lady Tanaya Keys is one of those three beautiful daughters, and she is also a faithful member of BBIC. We also have Elder-elect Nicole Henry. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. We had a guest that fell ill, and Lady Nicole jumped right in to serve in her stead, and I appreciate that. But Elder-elect Nicole Henry is a VP with a local nonprofit, and she's the founder of Women Empowering. She's also a loyal member of BBIC, and most importantly, she's the proud mother of Eli. And then last but not least, we have our favorite therapist with us, Lady Stephanie Broadax-Broussard. Stephanie has joined us before and had such an impact on us that we wanted to bring her back for this important topic. She is a licensed clinical social worker and an advanced certified hospice and palliative care social worker. She's the director of palliative care and social work at Texas Oncology, and she's a therapist in private practice at LCS Counseling and Consulting Agency. Although she's proud of all her professional accomplishments, the titles that she is most proud of is that of wife of Corey and the mother of CJ and Corbin. So I just want to thank you all for joining us on tonight, taking time out of your busy schedule to come and join us and to share with our family on Facebook Live tonight. So tonight we're starting our family meeting. Growing up, sometimes people, you all may have experienced having a family meeting when something was going on within the family. Your father, your mother would call a family meeting to discuss it, to see how everyone was feeling. But more likely than not, I know in my generation, we didn't have family meetings. It just was what it was. It happened, we did it, and we just went on. But more and more in this generation, that we are having family meetings to discuss what's going on, to discuss feelings, to discuss problems. We're having more and more family meetings. So we want to take a couple of weeks to talk about family meeting, and tonight's family discussion is going to be about overcoming grief. This topic is especially close to the members of BBIC right now because A faithful, loyal son and brother, Elder Tim Smitherman, transitioned on June 26th. It's the first death of a spiritual son that our pastor has experienced. And we, along with his wife, our pastor, his sons, and his family, are mourning his loss, 42 years old. And so there is a grief that has overcome his family and a lot of our members. But every one of you that are on the panel tonight have experienced some type of grief. I'm going to start with Lady Sandy. Lady Sandy, you have been where Lady Dee Dee is right now. First of all, can you just share a little bit about your husband, Tim?
Okay. Tim Keys, he was 51 when he transitioned. We had been together for just going on 27 years at that point. And our daughters were 19, 17, and 13 when he passed. He was a gospel musician. He played piano, organ, bass guitar, and drums, and sung. And he also was a caterer as well as a licensed real estate agent. So all of those roles he loved, and was very good at. His biggest, if you asked him what was most important to him, it was being a father and a husband. He was that guy that was always there with, the girls and I, and just very lively, just always around, always. They went on all my business trips with me. We homeschooled our children. So our children traveled with us, were with us all the time. And he was that life of the party, but also very down to earth and very connected to God. And that's how he ran his home. And he was the leader. And we were very blessed to have him in our lives for that amount of time that we were able to have him. And then his death was a sudden death. So it was one of those things that here now and gone within an hour of just saying my back hurts. And that is exactly how fast it happened.
Wow. Lady Tanaya. And I'm going to ask ladies if you would mute your phones when you're not, mute yourselves when you're not speaking. That might help us a little bit with that feedback. But Lady Tanaya, if someone asked you to describe your father, what would you say?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of words that can describe him. I would definitely say for me, he was my comforter. He always knew if I was feeling down, I guess he could just feel it in the spirit maybe. But I mean, he always had the perfect words to say if you were down. He was funny. He was definitely a comedian, great cook, great baker, just really the type of person that you wanted to be connected to. He was really big on love thy neighbor. So he was always just helping others, and you could literally see God through him, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I had the privilege of knowing Tim for a long, long time. And when I say he made the best peach cobbler and brisket on the earth, oh my goodness. But Sandy, you said that he died suddenly, and I remember that day so vividly. He died suddenly. What was the immediate impact that it had on you as a wife? What was the immediate impact his death had on you?
I think for me, the immediate impact was a lot of things. For me, I mean, I was in a different situation. Tim told me that he was going to go, and he told me for months. So for months, he had been telling me tidbits of different things, and wasn't sick though, but he was telling me that the Lord was going to take him home. So my immediate impact was, the immediate thing that hit me when they said he didn't make it was, he said this and now it's coming to pass. What do I tell my children? What do I tell his daughters? I can't. And I said that in the room. I'm like, I cannot tell my children that their dad is gone. I don't know how to do that. I was fortunate enough to feel that impact and have the surrounding of people who were just my lifeline, including you, as you know, was the first person who came to the hospital and walked in within minutes of them telling me that he was gone. So I think the immediate thing was, for me, was that, and me thinking immediately, I've never been an adult without him by my side. I literally had been with him since I was 19 years old. So it was, what do I do from this point? What do I say? What do I say to my children? How do I move to the next day? It was so many things that went through my mind in those very first moments. And how do I protect my children? My biggest thing was worrying about my children, because me saying, I was homeschooling them and all of that, I worked full time. My kids didn't go to daycare. They were with their father when I was working. So they had always been with their dad. So just the idea of that, where do we go from here? Because at that point we had a college student, a senior in high school, and an 8th grader. And all of that hit me at once, just so many things that were going through my mind. We moved to Texas for my job, but we moved because he decided he wanted to move here. And we had no family here. It was just us and you all, so it was the impact was harsh. It was just, the reality of it was, he's gone. Where do we go from here? How do I get my children to be emotionally okay? I was so concerned about my children that I had to step back and pray and say, how do I grieve myself?
That is so understandable. So understandable. Your sister Vicky is on live with us, and so she's saying hello to you. But Tanaya, you have 2 sisters, and although you all were grieving, did you all grieve differently, or was it all pretty much the same, or did you all have your own different way of grieving?
We definitely had our own way of grieving. For me personally, I didn't really allow myself to grieve. I wasn't a very openly emotional person. So watching everyone else grieve was, I guess, in a way, my way of grieving, was helping them to grieve. Even though I was going through the same thing, I just was still more in shock and disbelief more than anything. So for me, I didn't really allow those emotions to hit soon after he passed.
Okay, so being there for your sisters and for your mom was what helped you get through that initial process of grief, is being there for others. And I've heard that before, that is so common. Lady Sandy, you said having a good community, even though it was a small community, you had a good community surrounding you. And when you say surrounding you, what all do you mean? What did they do? What help? How did they help you? Because there's somebody out there that's a friend, that's a sister, that's a brother,
Right.
that they don't know how to be there. And it varies from person to person, of course. But how did people, or that community of that small circle, how did they help you during that time?
For me, like you just said, my sister is on. That particular sister and I are like the best of friends. She was on a plane and here within less than 24 hours of his passing with a suitcase that made you think she was staying for a month. And so for me, it was having you, having her, and it was, like you said, very small circle, because I always have had a small circle. But what you all did for me was, you allowed me to be me. You knew that it's having that circle. If you have it all the time, when it comes to time for something like this, they literally know how to deal with you. They know that, for me, I'm not an emotional person. My 19-year-old said it was the first time she ever saw me cry. It was and she didn't know how to handle it, because she said, I'm her rock, I'm her strength. They saw their dad cry, but they had never saw that emotion come from me. So having those people who know who you are and know how to deal with you, and they embrace you in that way, but they also say, just let it go. Whatever it is, let the tears flow, scream, holler, pray, whatever you need to do, but they allow you to be yourself. in that moment that helps you through the process.
Absolutely. Allowing you to be yourself. I think that's so important. So, Lady Nicole, Lady Sandy, and Lady Tanaya, they experienced the loss of a spouse, a loss of a parent, but you've experienced the loss of a child. I want to ask you, just like I asked Lady Sandy, was it immediate, or what was it? Was it something that you knew was going to happen and that you had time to process it? And what was the immediate impact on your life?
Well, I always like to start at the very beginning, which kind of sets the stage, and that starts with Eli. Eli was born in 2005, and he was a micro preemie. He was born at 24 weeks gestation, so I was only 6 months pregnant. And we went through that first year of him spending his first 3 months in the NICU, coming home on a heart monitor, and round the clock medications, therapy, doctor's appointments, and specialist appointments every week. And then on his 1 year birthday, his first birthday, we found out that we were expecting our second son, and his name was Joshua. And about 3 months in, I started having some complications, which they had been kind of watching me to prepare for. I was put on bed rest for 2 weeks, and I did deliver him early. He was 26 weeks. I was only at 26 weeks gestation when he was born. And when I was in the hospital for those 2 weeks, there was a peace that came over me. I felt that God was telling me, you're not going to leave here with the child. And that really prepared me. Now, I hoped for better, but that was what I felt in my spirit, that he was telling me, you're not leaving here with the child. And so almost 20 days later, 19 days later is when he got sick, and he did pass. We had to make the choice to take him off of the life support. And for me, it was life-changing. It was life-changing. I don't think anything can prepare you for the loss of anyone you love, but I literally felt like a piece of me died that day. But I had to get back home and take care of Eli because he was only one, and he still had a lot of health issues. So I had to get home and be mom and be mama to, Eli, and be a wife to my husband. And we had 2 older children from his first marriage, so I had to be there for them. So I just had to keep moving.
So when you say keep moving, was that your grief process, was to just keep moving? Would you say that Eli was maybe your lifeline at that time?
I definitely think so. People afterwards would ask me, how do you keep going? Because I did give myself time to grieve. I didn't jump right into it.
Now, when you say you gave yourself time to grieve, what does that mean? What does that mean?
I didn't rush myself through it. I allowed the upsetness, the anger, the kind of fear of how was I going to live after this, what life would be like. I allowed myself to go through all of those emotions. I didn't try to suppress it at all. I let myself, there were times when we would be in our car and I would just start crying, and I allowed myself to have all the range of emotions. And my husband hate to say allowed it, but, was understanding and was going through it too. And we went through it together. So you have to allow yourself that space to whatever you're feeling, to let it out.
That's good. Allow yourself to grieve. It really is okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. And from my experience, no one can rush you. No one can say you should be over this by now. You don't ever get over it. You just learn how to deal with it. You just learn how to keep living and keep doing what they would want you to do. I'm going to come back to Lady Nicole and Lady Sandy and Lady Tanaya at the end, because I want you to just speak to someone who may be in your situation. But right now, I'm going to ask Lady Stephanie to join the conversation. and I want to give her an opportunity to share with us. Now, coming from a clinical side, is there a clinical definition for grief?
So there is. So to start, just in general, grief is the normal process of reacting to loss. And so we all grieve, and grief isn't subjective to just a person, but it could be, death, social or occupational, any kind of loss. But of course, here in this setting, we're talking about the loss of a person. And so emotional reactions of grief can include anger, guilt, anxiety, sadness, or despair. So that's kind of just like a general term. But then when we look at the clinical framework of grief, there is complicated grief. There is persistent complex bereavement. And then there is also what we would consider complex grief. And then we look at the three different kind of frameworks of grief. The last two are really about diagnosing, as far as when we see challenges related to bereavement or complicated bereavement or persistent bereavement that includes some symptoms of major depressive disorder. And so there's been a lot of discussion about those definitions, but for the intent of our conversation, grief in general is a normal process, an emotional response to loss. That is a clear definition. Where it gets a little more technical is when we talk about complicated grief or complicated bereavement.
And you have a way of putting things so clear. I mean, that simple definition describes it fully, that simple definition. So you already talked about that there are different types of grief. What would you say people get wrong about grief? What do you think is some people have their own perception of grief? What is the major things that you see people get wrong as it concerns grief?
So you're going to try to get me in trouble, but I'm going to try to tread lightly. Listen, I'm so grateful that the leader keeps, your great leader allows me to keep coming back. And I want to be sure I keep that invitation. So I'm going to start this with saying that I think a few people get grief wrong. So there are those who are trying to be supportive and empathetic, who tell us that there's a way to grieve, or I even heard it today. Somebody even said, well, you just got to get over it. And I think the main misconception we have about grief is that there is a way to grieve. We do have labels as far as like healthy grieving, and then as we talked about persistent bereavement or complicated grief. But the reality is that healing is not linear, so neither is grief. Relationships are complex, so grief is complex. Because one of my favorite books has a quote in it that says, grief is the price that we pay for love. Wow. And loss. And so when we love someone and we lose them, part of that experience includes grief. And so there isn't a way to grieve. It doesn't have a look. It doesn't have a way. There isn't a particular style or how you're supposed to do it. And I get I do a lot of grief work because, of course, I'm palliative care. So my patients are, declining, and we're dealing with anticipatory grief, which is what Nicole actually explained perfectly in her piece. Sometimes anticipatory grief can come with anxiety, but for some people it comes with a peace, expecting something to happen. And so grief can include a lot of different emotions, and it's displayed different because we are different people. And so when we see somebody grieve differently than how we would have grieved, then we think something's wrong. Or if they're not grieving enough, maybe they didn't love them for real. Or if we are too deep in our grief, sometimes we say, well, we don't know that God can be a healer and be a peace, help give us peace. But Jesus wept, friends. So it's really about the clarity of understanding that these emotions are complex. And because we are complex beings. So if I said there's anything that we get wrong, it is that we try to label what the process should look like.
Wow, that is so true. I totally agree. You said that you quoted something. You said grief is the
price we pay for love.
If somebody could type that in the comments, that is something that's so profound. Grief is the price.
I wish I would have been the first person to say it, but I wasn't.
But that's a great statement.
It is.
And it's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, that that eventually may come with loving someone.
Right.
That grief
And if we're not careful, the fear, if we've experienced loss before, I don't want to get too deep, but if we've experienced loss before, the fear of that grief will prevent us from loving again, because we don't want to feel that kind of hurt again. We don't want to get into that space where we have to be that vulnerable, where we experience that kind of hurt, like Lady Keys and Nicole and Miss Sandy and Tanaya shared. Like you're trying to figure out how a piece of you, how to exist without this piece of you. And if we're not careful, we get into a space where we're not even willing to be vulnerable out of the fear of that hurt, that loss.
Yes, that is so true. That is so true. So, Lady Stephanie, I've always heard, I mean, if you have read any type of book or listen to any talk show, whenever they come on, they always say, oh, there are 5 stages of grief. First, you'll be in denial, then you'll be angry, then you'll be depressed, then you try to bargain, and then you finally just accept it. What do you say about that?
Can y'all see me rolling my eyes? Listen. The reality is that Kubler-Ross, who came up with this theory about the 5 stages of grief, I think had really great intentions. And at that point, we were just trying to put names to the stages and the process and what we feel and normalize grieving. But the reality is that we might as well throw that away. Grief is messy. It is not a stage, a progressive stage. Like you go to stage 1, then you go to stage 2. Anybody who's had any kind of loss can identify that you can maybe feel all of those things at one time, or feel one and not feel the other. Or you can go back and forth like ping pong. But then there are also other things that aren't named in that grief process that really is important to identify and normalize. For example, we a lot of times think when I love someone, only thing I'll feel in grief is the love and the loss. But the reality is that because relationships are complicated, I often can be frustrated. I could be disappointed. I could be angry. I could have resentment. And so those bring about other stages of processing other than just the denial of loss or the process of acceptance. I may can accept the fact that you are no longer present, but I may be in denial of the loss of the future that I thought we were going to have. So there are a lot of stages that come in this, I hate to say process, but there are a lot of things and a lot of layers. It's almost like a yo-yo with squiggly lines and all the arrows, because it doesn't have a way. There isn't a way to do it.
Lady Sandy, can you attest to that?
Most definitely. When she was talking, I was just thinking how much I told the girls when I sat them down after we, got through the process of the funeral and, all of that. The one thing that I said to them is, each of you will grieve differently. You cannot hold it against each other. We cannot sit there and go, well, why is she still crying? Or why won't she get over it? She's too emotional, or whatever the case may be. I need y'all to support each other in your own grief and make sure that everybody is allowed that time. And that time does not have an ending. It does. You don't know. Today could be the most wonderfulest day for Kelby, who's my youngest, and be a horrible day for Tanaya. So it's one of those that it's like, allow everybody to grieve in their own way. I agree with Stephanie wholeheartedly. There is no defined process of grief and no defined way on that roller coaster. It can be anywhere at any time. And that was one thing that I wanted the girls to know. And I immediately, within the first month, I took the girls to counseling, because we had never done this. We had never been without him. And I wanted them to be able to grieve by themselves the way that they wanted to grieve. So we started counseling as a family. And my youngest says she didn't want us in there. As a mother, I'm sitting there going, well, what do you mean? I couldn't grasp that. Although I had said we all need to grieve our own way. For her, we all 3 had him for a longer period of time than her, each of us more than the other. So she didn't think we understood her grief. And I get that. And I immediately told the clinical psychologist or whatever, I'm out. She's like, are you okay with that? Absolutely. Whatever I need to do to support her in her grief, that's her way to grieve. And if she needs to be without us, then we have to support her in that.
We have some comments coming through on Facebook. Lady Pam Harris said, I'm experiencing all of the emotions at the same time.
Mhm.
Lady Stephanie, we would say that's not possible to experience.
It's definitely possible.
It's extremely possible. Not only is it possible, it's healthy. So one of the things I want to challenge as a narrative for us, a lot of times we think that in order to be believers, in order to be sound in our faith, in order to trust God and anticipate his healings and his presence, that means we're void of emotion or complex emotion or difficult emotions. And that's not true. The reality is that grief is such a phenomenon that it can leave us laughing at the sound of a joke and almost to the point to where we end up in tears. It could leave a heart aching absence, but also this burst of light because you were here. And so it's complex. We can feel all those things all the time. And so one of the things, I'm a visual person. One of the things I often do with my families or my clients when we're doing grief work is draw a box, right? And so imagine that we're the box. And so grief is this ball inside of our box. And so when we first have that loss, the ball is big and it's touching every single surface in our box. There isn't any real space in our box. So we are triggered. I'm talking about a sound, a music, anything at any moment triggers us, right? There isn't any space for much else because everything feels the absence. But if we're doing the work to continue to process and to continue to heal, our ball gets smaller to where we have a little more room where we're not as triggered as often, but the triggers still come because we're human and we still have those attachments in that relationship. And so the hope is that as time goes on, you never lose the impact of that loss. It is still there, but it may become smaller and you're not as easily triggered. Not that the feeling or the relevance of that relationship or the relevance of that person changes, but your emotional response to that loss is not as easily impacted by day-to-day activities. That ball never disappears. It never goes away. And it is always with you. And that's why I don't like for people to say time heals all wounds. Actually, that loss is always there. But how we respond to it may differ. It may change. And so that's why it could be years from a loss, but I walk into a restaurant and I hear a song and I'm a mess. And I haven't had any kind of trigger or response for months or whatever, or a particular holiday or a sound trigger those things for me. And that's why it's very difficult for us to try to say how a person should grieve or how it should look or how people should respond, because all of those things are going to be different for everybody else. Grief is always with us.
Yes, it is. Lady Sandy brought up something. She said that she, after they got through the process of the burial and everything, she immediately took her daughters to counseling. Let me interrupt that thought because there is a good question on here. Lady Sylvia Granville asks, what do you do when others are expecting you to help them through their grieving process when you yourself are still grieving and need help yourself?
It's a good one. So I think that's really good. I think there are layers to this. So the first thing is that all you guys who described your grief talked about being present and showing up for somebody else as part of your healing. Each one of you, whether it's intentional or not, we often are able to divert our emotional needs to other people because it's easier. It appears easier, let me say that. But oftentimes the reality is that, especially when there's a familiar loss, where we're all grieving. And so part of what we have to learn to do as a society, as a people, as a body, is to be able to make our needs known and be okay with saying, you know what? I can't show up for you in this way. I'm here. I love you. I want to support you. But right now, it's hard for me too. And all I have the capacity to do is show up for myself. That's difficult when you have children, right? Because moms, you got to show up. Dads, you have to show up. So sometimes it's not as linear as being able to say, you know what, I can't do that for you right now. So sometimes that's not an appropriate response, especially when you have children that are grieving or that kind of thing. But when you are in a familiar system and it's like siblings or that kind of thing, it's okay to say, hey, I love you and I want to be here for you and I want to support you, but I don't have the capacity. Because here's what we do if we try to show up anyway. we risk the chance of causing harm because we ourselves have not healed. So then we start projecting.
Wow.
And so we project our needs or our feelings or our unresolved feelings onto other people. And so then it can impact their grieving. For example, you're a family where everyone's lost Big Mama, right? And everybody's feeling that loss, but you maybe have some unresolved feelings of guilt because you didn't come home enough. Or you maybe feel like there's something that you should have done that you didn't do. Well, if you try to lend yourself to be supportive to someone else where their issue is maybe they didn't feel like they got enough from that person, then you project the fact your feelings onto them, they are not the same. So now that person feels bad for the fact that they felt like they didn't get enough because you saying you didn't show up enough.
Wow.
So it can complicate others' grief if we step into a space that we're not ready for.
Wow. Wow. We have another comment. Well, it's a question really. And this is really good. And normally we don't go to the comments, but I've seen a couple of that popped up. One sister is saying, this is really helping me. My son's father died 7 years ago. Today is his dad's birthday. He is struggling today. I don't know how to help him. He has been crying off and on today. I feel so bad for him. I'm giving him space, but I want to help him. Can I? How can I help him?
So two things. First of all, I'm so sorry that you're in this space because I know as a mom, you want to be able to help. You want to be able to fix it. And this is something you can't fix. The reality is how you help him is by first holding space for him. And that's like a real counseling term where we talk about holding space. But that really means you're just sharing time and space with somebody and letting them be, letting them feel. And it's difficult. I'm a talker, even though I'm a therapist. In my personal life, sometimes I have difficulty holding space because I listen to other people for a living. And so holding space is really important, letting him be. He doesn't need you to try to say much because you can't fix it. You can't bring his dad back. So just hold space with him. Acknowledge that today must be a hard day and hold that space. That's the first thing. The second thing I would recommend is that you also create opportunities for him to honor his father. A lot of times what we do is we forget that grieving is not just emotional, but it also can be a physical activity. So creating moments where we acknowledge that loss, we are intentional about the memory and dedicating time to acknowledge, share funny stories. Let's talk about this person. Because a lot of times what we do as part of healing, we think is avoidance. If I just don't bring it up, if I just don't talk about them, will be better. And that's really not as helpful as acknowledging that person and that loss and creating time and space that's dedicated. And then lastly, let's get them to a counselor or a therapist. Grief work is so important because even the best relationships require some processing of loss because relationships are complicated. And as a boy growing up with expectations and desires to be a man, that only intensifies and complicates his grief as well. So I really would recommend that you just hold space for him, create opportunities for him to memorialize him. He may not want to, but so don't push him. But ask, is there something you would like to do to honor your dad today or something you want to do to remember your dad today? And then also, let's get him to a therapist.
All right. That is great information. That is wisdom. We are, this time has flown by. It is already 7:39. But I do want to give you all an opportunity. First of all, Elder-elect Nicole has posted Stephanie's information in the comments at LCS Consulting. If you need a therapist, if you need assistance, please contact her at LCS Counseling, in Fort Worth, Texas. But I want to give each one of you an opportunity. Just take 30 seconds, 30, 45 seconds. I want to start with Lady Sandy. If there's a spouse out there, if there's someone out there that has lost their spouse, if you could say anything for the next 30 seconds, next minute to encourage them, what would you say?
I would say first and foremost is to remember that they took your love with them. I think that as wives and spouses, or, on either side, we tend to believe that, or you may think, did I tell him I love him? I was blessed that Tim and I lived in the moment. We always told each other we loved each other. We always treated each day like it was our last day, and raised our children like that. So I had no regrets of me thinking that he wouldn't know those things, and that he didn't hear it that in that very last moment, or something of that nature. So I would say, remember how much you love that person, but remember, think about all the good memories. Think about all the things that make you smile. And one thing that when Stephanie was talking that I thought about was when Tim passed, I got a box, and we colored the box in his favorite color. And then we put music notes and different things that he liked, food and all that. And I would tell each girl, anytime you're having a day or anything's going on and you have a memory or something that you may not think the others even have that memory of, write it down and put it in this box. And once a year, we open the box and we go through it and just read them, and we laugh because we're thinking of it may be something funny or something. And it's a memory that the other sister may not have shared, or a memory that I shared with him that they may not have. And we can look back on that and just cherish the moments that we have. Just remember those moments. You have to allow yourself time to, as she says, grief is up and down, and it's all of them. And you will experience all those things, and pray and give it to God. And it's okay to go to God and question and everything, but be prepared for that answer, because you can go and say, why? Be prepared of what he may say. So be careful about how you do it, but I encourage you to do it. I got every answer that I needed.
That's great. Tanaya, to that child that maybe has lost a parent, take the next 30 seconds or so and encourage that child.
I would say for me, or for anyone going through the loss of a parent, it's very important to still do what your will is on earth, but also to, like Stephanie said, memorialize them in a way. What is it that you guys like to do together? What activities did you like to do together? Or what things remind you of them? You still want to honor their existence in a way that's healthy, but also still living and not giving up on anything. Because I know for me, I definitely had that struggle of, where do I go now? What do I do now? Is my life gonna just end right here? Like, what is the purpose of this? But the more you go on, the more you'll find your purpose. And God is always in the details.
Absolutely. That is great. And I know that your dad would be so proud of you, because you have accomplished everything that was on your list. You have accomplished all of it. And so I know that he would be so very proud of you, as we are. Nicole, speak to that parent that may have lost a child.
I would say, as I said earlier, keep moving. People would often ask me how I was able to keep going after. And what I really focused on was Eli and having to be his mom. But also I focused on the 19 precious days we did have with Joshua. And so when people would ask, how do you keep moving? How are you able to smile after this happened? I would always say, because I could have buried 2 children, so I am eternally grateful that it didn't turn out another way, because it could have turned out another way. So that really helped me as I started to heal and go through that process. So I encourage you to keep on moving, allow yourself to grieve, allow it, but keep moving. Don't let it consume you. Don't let it take you over. You have a life, you have a purpose. And I was determined that something good was going to come of this, that God was going to get the glory somehow. And I gave it up to him, and not to over spiritualize it, but I said, I need you to get the glory out of this. I need there to be something. And so I share my story with other mothers and with the community, so that way others know how to heal. So keep moving, focus on what you can, the positive, to help you move through. If you have other children, love on them, because that will help. That is healing in itself.
Okay. All right. God will get the glory out of this. That is such a powerful mindset to have in these situations, that God will get the glory. Stephanie, finally, if you could just take a few minutes and speak to someone who has experienced the physical loss of a loss of a loved one, take a minute or two and just share final words.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much for your transparency and your willingness to share. I am sure others were helped by your willingness to share your story and how you're journeying through grief. And so I think for those listening who've experienced any kind of loss, and so I'm just gonna, open those the borders up just a little bit. I want to first say that this is not where it all ends. And it sounds so cliche, but the reality is that I've had, patients and clients who literally feel like at this loss, I have died too, because we lose something. We lose. Loss is significant and it hurts. And there may be days where you feel like you cannot push forward, but this is not where it ends. There is a gift in your love, and the unfortunate circumstances that there may not be a tangible physical reflection of the person that was receiving that love with that relationship. That does not mean they are no longer there. And so you can continue to feel that love and process and heal, but still validate the presence and the value that relationship was. Even when we think about traumatic grief and we think about the losses that we didn't plan for, or we didn't have time to prepare ourselves, the reality is that there is hope for us. I'm a believer, so I believe that first and foremost that God is a healer, but also that there are a lot of groups and therapists and grieving circles and those kind of things to help make sure that we don't have to go it alone. Although every loss is different, there are people who can to sit with us and share space with us to help us through that journey. And then also, when we're dealing with grief, one of the things that I just want to encourage people to understand, we didn't talk a lot about it, but there are some tasks of grief, I think, that are important. And I think it's really important that we accept the reality. We talk a little bit about the acceptance and, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And these things don't have to happen in any kind of range or whatever, but it's important that we accept the reality of where we are, to identify that loss and normalize this season of where we are, because a lot of times we avoid the conversation, we avoid the thoughts, and it keeps us bound, kind of like Nicole said, it can consume us. And so we have to acknowledge the reality of that loss, and then we need to work through the pain and grief. We want to make sure that we call it out and we are specific about it, our feelings. You don't have to hold on to that. People may not understand it. They may not understand your tears. They may not understand how you're processing that grief, but your pain and your grief is real. So there's no need to try to disguise it or feel like you can't make it known. The people who are in your circle and who are for you are able to hold that space with you. And if not, find a professional who can do that. Find a support circle that can hold that space with you. And then also adjust to your new environment and your new normal. The reality is that when we lose a significant part of us, we are changed. Our environment may change. Our style, our methods of how we go through our day-to-day may change and be impacted. So try to adjust to that new normal, because if you continue to go through life as if that person were there, you will have some difficulty, because they are not. As painful as that is, as difficult as that is, they are not. So you have to adjust to a new process. That doesn't mean you neglect their memory. That doesn't mean you neglect the value of what they are to you, but you do have to continue to live and adjust to a new environment and a new normal. And then find an enduring connection with the deceased and move forward with your life. And so we talked about that, creating those, memories and moments and opportunities to really acknowledge a grief and acknowledge the value of that person is really important. You are not alone. God is with you and your community is here. And if you don't have one, let's build one. Let's create one. So feel free to reach out to me. There are a lot of different grief circles, as I said before, there are even some great grief groups that are actually on Facebook. And so I would love to share some resources with you if you need to. Also get plugged into your faith, your faith system. And a lot of times, I'm just going to give this caution to our churches. We have to normalize grief. We have to normalize the pain and the depression and the anxiety that also can come out of this grief. So people they are not afraid to speak up, to acknowledge that they are struggling. Because if we make it to where they can't speak up about what their needs are, we don't know how to be there for them. And so we want to make it a safe space where people are okay to say, yes, I love the Lord. I know he's faithful. I know he's to be a healer. But what I need him to heal is the grief that I'm feeling right now because I'm depressed and I didn't want to get out of bed and I didn't take a shower for several days because I'm sad.
Yeah.
So you normalize all of those things and create spaces where people feel like they can just be themselves and acknowledge their hurt and their pain. We can direct them to the healer.
That is great information. I don't know about you all in Facebook land, but this has been a healing balm for me. And I'm sure it has been for others. I thank you all, Elder-elect Nicole Henry, Lady Sandy, Lady Tanaya Keys, and to Lady Stephanie Broussard. I thank you. You all don't understand what you all just received. This session would have cost you $250 for the 45 minutes, but Lady Stephanie just imparted to us and helped so many that are out there that are grieving right now at this time. So ladies, thank you so much. Again, like Stephanie said, thank you for your transparency. Thank you for being willing to share your story. Elder-elect Nicole, thank you for filling in for me. I appreciate that so much. So at this time, BBIC family and friends, I thank you for joining us for Tailor Made Tuesday. And I want to ask you to sow a seed into tonight. Tonight was a blessing for so many. I know that many of you received answers. Many of you gain understanding as to where you are right now in your process. So we have a showing on the screen, the 5 different ways that you can be a blessing to BBIC. And I'm going to ask that you sow at least $10 into BBIC on this evening for the blessings that we have received on tonight. So Father, in the name of Jesus, we thank you right now. We thank you for the words that we have heard on tonight, the wisdom, the encouragement, the testimonies. I ask that if there's anyone out there that's listening, Father, that is going through a grief process right now, Father, that they would heed the words that Stephanie and those that shared their stories spoke on tonight, Father, and let them know that they are not alone. First of all, you're with them, we're with them, and there is help out there for them. They're not crazy. They're grieving. It's natural, a natural process. Be with them, Lord. And we thank you in Jesus' name. On behalf of our lead pastor, Dr. Jonathan L. Pat, we thank you for joining us for Tailor Made Tuesday. And we look forward to seeing you on next week as we continue our family meeting. Good night.